ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that Willow had always understood the power of timing, but lately she had discovered something far more potent, the power of fear. Not the overwhelming fear that destroys a person outright, but the quieter, more corrosive version that corrodes confidence, clouds judgment, and bends people into shapes they never expected to take. She wielded that fear now with a precision that shocked even her, shaping it into a new form of manipulation that hovered somewhere between desperation and strategy. She convinced herself it was necessary that everything she did was for Wiley and Amelia, that reclaiming her children justified the darkness gathering inside her. But beneath the polished excuses was a truth she refused to examine. Willow was changing, and not for the better. Her new target was Danny, and the unfortunate fact was that Danny had already handed her a weakness. He had violated the no-contact order by meeting Scout in the snow, and even though the moment was innocent pure, and fleeting Willow saw only opportunity. She replayed the scene in her mind, like a prosecutor studying a crime, shaping it into a narrative she could use. A story that, if bent the right way, could place Danny, Scout, and even Alexis beneath her thumb. Alexis sensed this change long before Willow said a word, a tremor beneath Willow's soft tone, an iciness hidden behind her polite smiles. There was something sharpened about her now, something calculating in the way she selected each word. And Alexis felt a cold coil tighten in her stomach as she realized Willow wasn't coming to her for guidance anymore. She was coming to leverage her. It started subtly with Willow expressing concern about Danny's violation, but Alexis heard the shift instantly. Willow wasn't grieving or frightened. She was hinting. She was shaping the violation into evidence that could be weaponized. Alexis felt a rush of dread because Willow was laying out a path that could destroy Danny's future, break Scout's fragile healing, and ignite a crisis far worse than anything they had endured. And Willow was doing it calmly, as though she were simply describing reality instead of rewriting it. What matters, Willow insisted, is that consequences need to be taken seriously. It wasn't a threat, not directly, but Alexis felt the weight of it pressing against her ribs. Willow wasn't asking for support. She was positioning herself as the arbiter of punishment, subtly reminding Alexis that she could expose Danny's violation to authorities at any time. The fear wormed deeper when Willow began referencing dates, times, and specific phrases Danny had said while playing with Scout, details she shouldn't have known unless she had been studying the incident far more closely than she admitted. Willow wasn't just recalling events. She was curating them, constructing a version of the story that placed Danny in the worst possible light and portraying herself as the innocent bystander forced into a moral dilemma. Alexis could practically see the narrative forming: Willow, the concerned guardian; Danny, the troubled teen ignoring the law; Scout, the vulnerable child placed at risk; Alexis, the negligent adult who failed to enforce boundaries. With every word Willow spoke, Alexis felt her heartbeat increase, a quiet panic tightening her breath. She recognized what Willow was doing, but she also knew she had no way to stop it, not without provoking a deeper retaliation. Because Willow now had something she never had before: leverage. And Alexis had something Willow desperately wanted access to: Wiley and Amelia. The new version of Willow, strategic, controlled, and quietly ruthless, saw the perfect exchange. If Alexis helped her regain access to her children, Willow would ensure the situation with Danny quietly disappeared. But if Alexis refused, Willow could adjust her story, highlight the most incriminating elements, and present Danny's violation in a way that made it look like a deliberate, dangerous act. No judge would ignore a child's safety, and Willow knew that. The courts would take action. Danny would face consequences. Scout would be further traumatized, and Alexis would be blamed for allowing the violation to happen. It was blackmail without the ugliness of the word. It was manipulation disguised as maternal concern. And it was working. Alexis tried to remain calm, telling herself she could reason with Willow, appeal to her better nature, but she could feel the shifting terrain beneath her feet. Willow wasn't the same gentle soul who once fought for peace and fairness. This version was forged from lost resentment and a hunger for control. She had tasted the power of pushing back against Michael, against the legal system, against the image of the fragile martyr she once embodied. Now she wanted more. Alexis's fear grew not only because Willow was using Danny as leverage, but because Willow seemed comfortable doing it. There was no hesitation, no guilt flickering in her eyes. Instead, she carried herself with a cold confidence, as though she had rehearsed every possible outcome and accepted them all. The danger wasn't just the threat against Danny, the danger was the person Willow was becoming. She was rewriting her own story, reframing her identity as someone who could and would reshape reality to maintain control. And once someone embraces that mindset, there's no telling how far they will go. Alexis realized she didn't have the luxury of waiting anymore. She needed to act not just to protect Danny, but to prevent Willow from tightening her grip on the entire situation. Yet every potential step forward felt like walking into a trap. If she pushed too hard, Willow would retaliate. If she hesitated, Willow would gain even more momentum. It was a tightening vice pressure from every direction. The most chilling moment came when Willow gently reminded Alexis that once a violation like Danny's was formally Log the system tends to take these cases seriously. The words were soft, but the meaning was razor sharp. Willow wasn't warning her. She was informing her. She was letting Alexis know that she held the match over a fuse already laid, and whether she lit it depended entirely on Alexis's cooperation. In that moment, Alexis understood the full scale of the danger. Willow wasn't bluffing. Willow wasn't confused. Willow wasn't overwhelmed. Willow was calculating. This was a new kind of battle, one fought in shadows with rewritten details and shifting narratives. One where Willow's quiet determination bent the truth into shapes that suited her. One where Alexis was forced to protect her family while navigating a version of Willow she barely recognized. And as the tension stretched thinner, as Willow tightened her hold on the story she was crafting, Alexis knew one thing with absolute certainty: if she didn't find a way to stop this now, Willow's new strategy of control could destroy far more than Danny. It could unravel everything. Willow had begun to understand that power did not always appear in loud declarations or courtroom victories. Sometimes it lived in the quiet spaces between fear and hesitation, and she was learning how to navigate those spaces with unnerving precision. Danny's violation of the no-contact order had been a minor incident to most people, a harmless moment in the snow between two children who missed each other. But Willow looked at it and saw a turning point. She studied every detail with the calculating focus of someone who had realized the story could be shaped differently, depending on who held the pen. In her hands, Danny's mistake could become leverage, a tool sharp enough to open any door she needed to open, especially the one that had been slammed between her and her children. She told herself she was doing what any mother would do, but the truth was darker and heavier than that. She was no longer simply fighting for her place, she was manipulating the battlefield itself, and she was beginning to enjoy the control it gave her. Alexis felt the shift almost immediately. She had dealt with lies, manipulation, and denial for most of her career. Yet something about Willow's sudden composure unsettled her. Willow did not tremble. She did not plead. She presented the information like someone who had already decided the outcome, and Alexis sensed the hidden threat layered beneath every carefully chosen word. Willow could destroy Danny's stability and Scout's fragile recovery with a single report. Worse than that, she could frame Alexis as negligent, painting her as the adult who failed to protect two children from violating a legal order. Alexis saw the trap tightening around her long before Willow acknowledged it, and she felt a cold rush of helplessness as she recognized she had no simple way out. Willow had built the perfect story and Alexis was trapped inside it. The danger intensified when Willow questioned whether Alexis truly wanted to subject Scout and Danny to another cycle of trauma. The accusation was not spoken outright, but its weight pressed heavily between them. Willow implied that if Alexis insisted on resisting her demands, she would be the one responsible for the suffering that followed. Alexis heard the implication clearly and felt it cut through whatever confidence she had left. The decision was no longer about right or wrong, it was about preventing devastation. And Willow knew it. What terrified Alexis most was the realization that Willow was doing all of this calmly, almost clinically, without the emotional turmoil she once exhibited. She had become sharper, colder, and disturbingly detached. There was a new hunger in her, a new need, not merely to reunite with her children, but to dominate the narrative itself. Alexis understood that once someone stepped over that line, once they tasted what it felt like to bend circumstances to their will, there was no predictable limit to how far they would go. That fear pushed her to consider the unthinkable helping Willow, even if it meant betraying her own instincts. Even if it meant bowing to a form of coercion she despised. But helping Willow meant turning to Michael, and that created an entirely new fracture in the ground beneath them. Michael would not be able to ignore the situation once Alexis involved him. He would be forced to choose which child's well-being mattered more. And Alexis knew that either decision could break him. If he protected, Danny Scout would suffer the consequences. If he protected, Scout Danny might face legal action that could alter the course of his life. Willow understood all of this and wielded it like a master strategist, using the complexity of the situation to maintain her upper hand. She saw the conflict Michael would face as an advantage, something that ensured he would either side with her or suffer the weight of the fallout. For now, Willow held the advantage, and she walked with the confidence of someone who believed the upper hand belonged to her by right. But power gained through manipulation was unstable. It cracked, shifted, and could collapse under the slightest pressure. Michael might be cornered for the moment, but he was not someone who surrendered quietly. If he discovered Willow was using Danny as a pawn, if he realized she was reshaping the truth for personal gain, he could retaliate in ways she had not prepared for. Michael had inherited his family's strategic instincts. He knew how to wait, how to strike, and how to dismantle a threat piece by piece when pushed too far. What Willow did not foresee was how close her own secrets were to unraveling. She believed she could control Alexis, manipulate Michael, and silence any consequence tied to Danny's violation. But secrets were unstable currency. They gained value only as long as they remained hidden, and once exposed, they became explosive. Willow's secret, whatever she had, buried deep to maintain her image, her power. Her leverage was no longer as secure as she believed. She had tugged too hard on too many threads, and the fabric around her was beginning to tear. Alexis could sense it. Every time Willow pressed her advantage, every time she twisted the narrative, Alexis felt the subtle shift in the air. The sense that something larger was coming. She was fighting to regain Danny's rights, trying to shield him from a consequence he did not deserve. But the more she fought, the more she exposed the cracks in Willow's story. Those cracks were spreading, revealing inconsistencies Willow could no longer hide behind charm or vulnerability. And once Michael noticed those cracks, once he began pulling them apart, Willow would lose far more than leverage. She would lose the illusion of control that she had built her entire strategy upon. The true disaster was not what Willow was doing to Danny or Alexis. It was what she was doing to herself. Her hunger for control was reshaping her into someone unrecognizable. Someone capable of inflicting pain while justifying every action as necessary. When her secret finally surfaced, and it would, she would not merely lose her power. She would face the full weight of the damage she had caused. Port Charles had seen people fall before, but few had fallen from a height they worked so hard and so ruthlessly to climb. And beneath all of this, like a storm-gathering force offshore, was the truth that none of them were ready to face. Willow believed she could manipulate the story forever. But the story was beginning to turn against her, and the next chapter would not be one she could rewrite. Alexis had spent weeks drowning beneath Willow's pressure, fighting against the suffocating sense that she was losing control of everything she cared about. But something shifted the moment she realized Willow had crossed a line she could no longer ignore. It wasn't simply manipulation anymore, it was a calculated threat against Danny and Scout. A willingness to use their innocence as leverage. That realization ignited something inside Alexis, not fear but purpose. She began to study every detail of Willow's claims, every inconsistency, every contradiction that Willow thought she had hidden beneath a layer of false concern. And slowly, piece by piece, Alexis rebuilt the case she needed to reclaim what Willow had tried to steal: custody and authority over the children. She had sworn to protect. The moment Alexis regained guardianship rights over Scout and Danny was not a victory she celebrated. It was a necessary correction. A quiet recalibration of balance that had long been distorted by Willow's increasingly dangerous agenda. But with that correction came a consequence Willow had not anticipated. Alexis was no longer fighting alone. Michael, who had tried for so long to maintain peace, found himself stepping onto a battlefield he never wanted to enter. Once he learned how deeply Willow had twisted the truth, how she had weaponized Danny's vulnerability and Scout's innocence, something dark and resolute took root inside him. For the first time, Michael and Alexis stood united, not out of convenience, but from shared outrage and shared responsibility. They both knew that Willow's behavior had escalated into something unstable, something manipulative enough to injure the very children she claimed to love. They began planning with a quiet intensity, gathering evidence documenting each contradiction in Willow's story, and preparing to dismantle the narrative she had worked so carefully to build. Willow had believed that by controlling the story, she controlled the outcome. But Alexis and Michael were rewriting that story now, and every new discovery added weight to the consequences Willow would soon face. Willow sensed the shift before either of them said a word. The atmosphere around her felt tighter, heavier, as though the walls she once used to keep others out were now closing in on her instead. When Alexis reclaimed legal authority, Willow felt an invisible hand tightening around her ribs. When Michael stopped avoiding confrontation and instead began looking at her with a cold, calculating calm, panic flickered through her briefly at first, then spreading like a shadow across her entire mind. She had believed she held the upper hand. She had believed that by controlling the narrative of Danny's violation, she could force Alexis and Michael to give her what she wanted. But now the balance of power had shifted dramatically, and Willow found herself standing in the middle of a battlefield where every step felt like a miscalculation waiting to explode. Alexis knew that reclaiming custody was only the beginning. Willow's earlier threats, her strategic manipulation, and her distortion of facts all pointed toward a dangerous behavioral shift that could no longer be dismissed as desperation. There was calculation behind every move. Willow made dark calculation, and Alexis understood that if they did not act swiftly, Willow might escalate again. This wasn't simply a custody conflict. It was the beginning of a deeper unraveling, one that threatened to consume not only Willow but everyone connected to her. Michael saw it too. He began examining the puzzle with a clarity he hadn't allowed himself before, tracing each motive, each hidden intention. He could see the way Willow had tested boundaries, how she pushed Alexis into corners and attempted to weaponize Danny's mistake, how she tried to manipulate the legal system behind a mask of maternal suffering. Michael felt guilt, anger, and betrayal clash violently inside him. How had he not seen this sooner? How long had Willow been drifting into this dangerous version of herself, and worse? How far was she willing to go now that she realized her control was slipping? Together, Michael and Alexis formed a new plan, one driven not by retaliation, but by protection. They needed to document Willow's actions, stabilize the situation. and ensure the children would not be caught in the crossfire of Willow's psychological descent. But as they moved forward, Willow began to detect the cracks forming around her, and she panicked. She attempted to revise her story again, to adjust her narrative, to shift the blame back onto Alexis, onto Danny, onto circumstances she could no longer control. This new adjustment, this frantic attempt to reshape events, only exposed her further. It became clear that Willow was spiraling into a new pattern of calculations, each more reckless than the last. She pressed harder, insisted louder, tried to manipulate faster, but all she succeeded in doing was revealing the truth she had been hiding. She was losing herself, losing her grip, and losing the very people she once claimed to love. And then came the revelation that no one expected the secret Willow thought she had buried beneath her schemes. The secret that would shatter the illusion she had built and expose the true danger she had become. It surfaced not through confrontation but through consequence, rising like a submerged blade, cutting through the calm she attempted to display. That secret became the turning point. It was the shock Alexis had feared, the confirmation Michael had dreaded. The disaster that had been quietly forming beneath every lie Willow told and every manipulation she crafted. It proved that this was no longer a battle for custody or control, it was a battle for the safety of everyone involved. The new calculation unfolding now belonged not to Willow, but to Alexis and Michael. Their plan was no longer reactive, but strategic, fortified by evidence, clarity, and unity. Willow had believed she could manipulate her way to victory, but now she stood at the edge of her own collapse, unaware of how close the ground was to breaking beneath her. And as the truth moved quietly toward the surface, a chilling realization settled over all three of them. The next shock wasn't coming. It was already here.